Hey, in just a moment, we are going to be joining Pastor Eric for the final week of our series, The Family Tree. If you have been with us for the last 3 weeks, this is the final week, the fourth week, and we're wrapping this up right before Christmas. But right after the break, before the message, I want to show you something really special that we did across our locations this last weekend. Thank you for being here today, and welcome to SMCC Online. We'll get to Pastor Eric and our message in just a moment, but I want to let you know about something special. We at SMCC, we want to partner with ministries outside the walls of our church. And this last weekend, we got to partner using our hands and also being generous with these ministry partners. So I want to show you a little glimpse and review of what we did across our locations this last weekend.
Holding Out Help is a wonderful organization that helps women and families in need that have made the decision to leave polygamy.
So tonight we're here to wrap the gifts for all the clients that we have.
All these gifts have been given to us, have been donated from the various SMCC campuses.
Most of our clients are 18 years plus, but they're usually young adults. We do have some moms with kids as well that we support. So these gifts are going to be going to these families or people who are in need.
We're out here tonight because we want to be the hands for Jesus. I'm here because these are my people. This project feels close to my heart, and I just want to help out.
We think that it's important for us to give back and show, that we enjoy community some support. And,
we love HOH.
Yeah, and we like the kids, support the kids, man. It's great.
This will mean that our clients will have a lovely Christmas, is what it will mean. A lot of them don't have a whole lot, and this is a wonderful way to bless them.
If I could send one quick message to the clients, is that people are here for anything you need, and this is just one small way that we can show you that.
So we couldn't be more grateful to SMCC for hosting this event here and the party that will take place on Saturday. We are just overwhelmed by the support and love and the volunteers that are here tonight. So we want to just thank you from the bottom of our heart.
Hey, SMCC, it's Eric here. We're at the Pregnancy Resource Center. They're one of our ministry partners. When you look at the life of Jesus, it's just super clear. He helped people in transition, people in need, people in crisis, people at every stage of life. And as a church, we want to do the same thing. So we're here organizing, stacking, a whole team of people. It is awesome. Thanks for being a part of this.
We love having volunteers here. It's just we are so blessed by all the donations we receive that we just don't have enough hands on deck to go through all of them. So having a group this big has just been such a blessing.
I love that our church does this because I feel like it's really important to serve other people. We're all called to support each other and just unite together as a body of Christ to lift up each other and others who need it.
All the things that are being sorted right now will just go to our moms in need that participate in our parenting classes, or if they just call and tell us, hey, I have no money for diapers this month, please help us out. We would be very happy to do that for them.
Getting to be the hands of Christ is important to me because it lets me put my faith into action and takes an internal transformation and makes it a reality.
So at the Pregnancy Resource Center, mothers get a lot of different resources, including free ultrasounds, counseling, discussing what options are out there, but also they get supplies for newborns. They don't want to just suggest a route or something to do and then not provide them with resources. And so this is where a mom would come in and be able to get some resources that would help her in making that decision easier.
To everyone that donated anything really, like the smallest diaper rash cream, the smallest pack of diapers, everything is such a blessing, and thank you so much.
How's it going?
Really well. It's been a good day.
Hey, well, it's great to be with you. I'm Eric. If we haven't met, get to serve here as one of the pastors. And as we kick off today's message, I just want to show you a picture and introduce you to my son, Jack. He's my youngest. He's about to turn 8. This is Jack right here. And, the things that come out of Jack's mouth, they are crazy. If you have an 8-year-old, maybe you know this. The things that come out of his mouth, it's just legendary. He has coined the phrase, the big Effie, when referring to the F-bomb. I know some of us around here at SMCC have adopted that into our vocabulary. He coined the phrase, smudging butts, for what moms and dads do after the kids go to bed. And I know some have adopted that phrase as well. Last week we were in the car and he was trying to talk about Snoop Dogg, the rapper, and he called him Snoopy the Raptor, all right? The things that come out of his mouth, it's just so crazy. But he's a bit more serious as well. And the other day we were at the orthodontist and one of the employees there asked him a question, Jack, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to play in the NHL, be a professional hockey player. He says, but if I can't do that, I want to be a pastor so I can help people follow God and help them not put drugs into their bodies. I thought, all right, son, not a bad goal. Proud of you. Now, last month we were driving to the South Jordan location, and if you haven't been there recently, that location's busting at the seams. It's great to be there. We were driving there as a family, and I asked my son this question. I said, hey, Jack, who's the worst sinner that you know? If that sounds like a harsh question, let me give you a little context. Carissa and I were talking about one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is this: if you're not the worst sinner you know, then you don't know yourself very well. That's what we were talking about. And I wanted to get Jack's hot take on this, so I asked him, who's the worst sinner you know, Jack? And he says, oh, Dad, I know who that is. And I said, oh, really, buddy? Would you go ahead and tell me, who's the worst sinner you know? He goes, Dad, you are. And I said, well, really? He goes, yeah, you in high school, all right? This is Jack's phrase. And man, I told him one story about me in high school, and this is what sticks. This is the legacy that I'm leaving to my son, Jack. I want to start with this point. We are already building a legacy that will be the legacy we leave. Like it or not, know it or not, you are building a legacy. A legacy is just something that will be passed on to the people after you when you're done. When you're done, the influence you had here will continue on after you, and that is often called a legacy. And whether you know it or not, like it or not, you're passing on a legacy. You're building it right now because people are watching you. And maybe you don't even have kids. That's okay. The people around you, the people closest to you, they are watching you. This is how Jack knows about Snoop Dogg. My wife Carissa's always busting Snoop Dogg in the car, all right? Bumping Snoop Dogg. I'm just kidding. Snoop Dogg did a cameo with Ben Rector, and we do listen to that in the car. That's how he knew. But he also knows, to some degree, what it means to be a pastor as well. We are already building a legacy. It's going to be the legacy that we leave. Now, here's the interesting thing about this time of year, the holidays and the Christmas season. The holidays, well, they multiply your legacy. I mean, 1 month now is like 6 months or 10 months throughout the year normally. What happens in this month, how you celebrate and how you go about this month, it multiplies your legacy. It's like the dog years of legacy, you know? It really does matter. So today I just want to ask you a question. It's this question right here. What do you want to pass on to the people that matter the most to you? What is it that you want to pass on? Today in the message, I want to talk about one thing we should never pass on, and another thing that we should really strongly consider passing on. And if you're a Jesus follower, I think this is something we are challenged and invited and even commanded to pass on. And to show you that, I want to take you deep into the story of this royal family we've been studying over the last few weeks. I want to show you the legacy that David passed on to Solomon and how King Solomon lived. And I want to show you something that King Solomon has actually passed on to every one of us. So this series, The Family Tree, has been all about one royal family and the dysfunction within it. We've been studying this family for a few reasons. We wanted to just really highlight God's provision and God's faithfulness to his promise to deliver a Savior to the world through this one royal family. And God came through on it, of course he did. But we've also been looking at the dysfunction in this family to learn something about dysfunction and apply that thing that we've learned into our own lives so that we can take an axe to dysfunction in our families this season, an axe to the toxic behaviors and trends that so often show up in our families this time of year. Now, on Sundays, we've been kind of doing a big overview, just some general highlights of the story, or perhaps lowlights. But what I love about this season for us is that we've also put out a devotional. It comes out every day, and 500 people here at SMCC signed up for that devotional this season. That was so encouraging to me to see so many people digging in to the Bible to look at this story. The devotionals are really highlighted around this concept that grew about in the medieval period called the Jesse tree, where we would highlight, this concept highlights God's goodness through the line of Jesse, through King David, all the way to Jesus. And so the Jesse tree has been the backdrop of this series. It's also been the focus of our Christmas Advent devotional. So today we pick it up again with one more very famous king in Israel, King Solomon, who also would show up in the genealogy of Jesus at the very beginning of Matthew. We're going to pick it up today as David has his final conversation, his final words to his son and the next king, King Solomon. So here we go, 1 Kings chapter 2. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man. Kind of like that. I don't know if there's any Jordan Peterson fans out there, but I think Jordan Peterson maybe ripped off King David. Act like a man, be the leader this nation needs, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him, keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. And he reiterates it, if your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. I think David has inserted maybe a bit of his own approach into what this promise would look like from God. But this is a moment where he just looks his son in the eye and says, son, just continue to trust God. Continue to follow him. And it seems like a great moment. But then he says something next that kind of caught me off guard. Look at what he says next. Now you yourself know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me. We could read about that in the previous book. What he did to the two commanders of Israel's armies, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shedding their blood in peacetime as if in battle. And with that blood, he stained the belt around his waist and the sandals on his feet. Deal with him according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace. So here's what makes this moment very interesting. He gives his son these marching orders, how to carry on with a legacy after him, a legacy that would honor God. And then right after he talks about honoring God, he's going to give his son a hit list for who to take out after he's dead. This is so interesting. Keep going, verse 7. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, and let them be among those who eat at your table. They stood by me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Remember, you have with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who called down bitter curses on me the day I went to Mahanaim, when he came down to meet me at the Jordan. I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. But now do not consider him innocent. You're a man of wisdom. You'll know what to do to him. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. David takes his last breath. Verse 11, he had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father, and his rule was firmly established. So throughout all the drama, all the dysfunction, all the tension, the throne was passed on, the crown was placed on Solomon at this point. And we move into the next generation of leadership, royal leadership here for Israel. And but the thing that stands out to me is David's words are like honor God, and then it's like and kill these people next too. And that's what makes passages like these so difficult, is you do have these moments of people honoring God, and then these moments where, once again, they seem to just want to honor self. Selfless and then selfish, all woven together. And we see that tension, we see that struggle or that battle, if you will, in this final conversation, in this legacy. And it's difficult to read at times, and it's difficult to interpret, but I don't think it should be all that difficult, because isn't this our lives as well? Aren't our lives marked by that same tension, that same battle, that same struggle? The New Testament calls this struggle the struggle between the spirit and the flesh, the spirit and the flesh. And I think we should just be honest that these people in the Bible, men and women in the Bible, they too wrestled with that, honoring God and honoring themselves first, worshiping him and worshiping themselves first. That struggle plays out in this final conversation. David knew it all too well. Now, I was reminded of this battle recently in my own life in a bit of a silly way, but I thought it was interesting. You know, this is the time of year where Spotify, the app that I get all my music from, gives me and gives you, if you're a Spotify user, all your music trends for the entire year. You know, most played, most listened to song. And so I got that, and I brought it for you because I think in it you kind of see the little bit of this struggle or this battle. So take a look at this right here, you know? It's punk rock in the first 2 slots, and then it's worship in the next few. I mean, that's my life, you know, punk rock and worship. That's the music choice I have. I'm a bit schizophrenic in my music preferences. Perhaps you are as well. But in this, we just still see that tension just a little bit. Now, this is a silly thing. It's a small thing. It doesn't really matter all that much. But in our own lives, don't we see that struggle play out? But let me highlight something for you about this struggle. That when it plays out in this way that I'm about to describe, it becomes a very serious thing, a very scary thing, a very dangerous thing. And if you grew up in religion, you know this all too well. You've seen it, experienced it, you've lived it. I want you to see this. See, religion often focuses on public performances that aren't supported by personal devotion. And when public displays of spirituality or religion or faith are more important than personal, private devotion, you are on your way to some dysfunction. And religion often focuses on public performances at the expense of what's going on privately behind the scenes in a person's life. It plays out in the dad. There's one way at church, one way in the lobby at church, one way on the stage at church, one way in small group when his friends are around who are also spiritual, but then behind the scenes treats his wife and his kids oh so differently. It plays out there because for that dad, the religious performance, the spiritual performance is far more important than the private devotion. And if you grew up in a home like that, if you grew up around that, it was probably so ugly and so disgusting to you. It's ugly and disgusting to God as well. We see this play out in the religious leader who's wonderful on the stage, stringing together spiritual vocabulary in a way that makes people pause and listen. But then at home hides behaviors from the family, hides behaviors from the church. I've seen it happen just so many times. In fact, this is a very strong warning in my own life. And I would guess that you probably know people. Perhaps you are a person who has seen this. And there are people who have walked away from God entirely because of this. The hypocrisy they saw, the gap between public displays of spirituality and a lack of private devotion was so off-putting and so concerning. People thought, I want nothing to do with a God like that. If you see that as a problem, I want you to know God sees that problem as well. And I hope this message might just be a fist bump to you to say, look, it should not be this way. And you should know this. Jesus was nothing like this. He was the opposite of hypocrisy in absolutely every single way. And I just would love to invite you to reconsider him if you've just seen the gap between public performance and private devotion. Unfortunately, I think David in some ways passed this on to his son Solomon. Public displays of spirituality at the expense of private devotion to the God of creation. And as we read on now and look at Solomon's life and Solomon's story, I think we're going to see it. But first, I got to do something a bit technical. I got to take you back into a warning that God gave through Moses to future kings of Israel. It's in the book of Deuteronomy, and it really serves as the marching orders, the guidelines, the blueprints, the handbook for how to be a king. All right, let me read this to you in Deuteronomy. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the other nations around us, be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not an Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them, for the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he's to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law taken from that of the Levitical priests. It's to be with him. He's to read it all the days of his life so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees and not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites and turn from the law to the right or to the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. So these were the guidelines for how kings should operate. What were those guidelines again? If you're taking notes at home, here they are. No stockpiling of horses or weapons, all right? Don't build a militia. Don't build your army that way. Don't stockpile in that way. Don't be like Egypt. Don't be like Pharaoh. That was an important part of it. No polygamy, all right? That was an important part of it. And no greed for silver and gold. And also, in a good way, read God's truth regularly in a way that supports the sacrificial system God gifted to Israel. That was about it, all right? Those were the main rules. If a king could follow that, this king would probably be in good shape for a long, long time. So, how did Solomon do now? What I want to do is take a quick tour through Solomon's life to give you the theme, the trend, his leadership. This is all recorded for us in the book of 1 Kings, all right? Let's see how Solomon did. Let's see how he lived up to these requirements of being a godly leader. Chapter 3, verse 1 of 1 Kings. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. 0 for 1. He made an alliance with Pharaoh. When you make an alliance with somebody, your values line up with them. You're going to work with them. When you marry into the family, you're probably going to be a bit like them. Solomon is 0 for 1. Let's look at the next one. Verse 3 now. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. So Solomon loved the Lord, except he also sacrificed and worshiped in pagan places. Solomon, 0 for 2. 0 for 2. Let's read some more. It's not all bad, though. Up to chapter 6 this time. In the 11th year in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications. He had spent 7 years building it. So Solomon, and this is a different message for a different day, but he's built this temple, a place for God's glory and God's honor. But it took Solomon, look at this, 7 years building it. It took Solomon 13 years, however, here's the however, to complete the construction of his palace. Twice as long to build his own house. So he builds a place of worship, great. But he spends quite a bit more time building his own place, his own house, which is probably a quick little clue to the focus of his attention. And then there's this moment where he dedicates the temple, and it's this real beautiful prayer. But I just can't help but wonder, is this prayer a spiritual public performance, or is this prayer an expression of Solomon's private devotion to God? Probably a little bit of both, actually. Let's keep reading. What happens next? We're in chapter 9 now. There were still some people left from the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These peoples were not Israelites. Solomon conscripted the descendants of all these peoples remaining in the land, whom the Israelites could not exterminate, to serve as slave labor as it is to this day. So now Solomon has oppressed foreigners. He's made them slaves. He is like the new Pharaoh at this point. All right? Gets worse. Chapter 10 now. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the territories. The author is telling us that the wealth that Solomon had, it was just a sign of his wayward heart at this time. This looks like strike 3. Just looks like strike 3, doesn't it? I mean, at this point, his passion and his desire, in fact, his greed for wealth, I think it's really violated the warning that we just saw in Deuteronomy. But Solomon is not done yet. Let's keep reading. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt, from Kue. The royal merchants purchased them from Kue at the current price. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and of the Arameans. So now he's building his weapons cache and he's exporting these weapons to others. I mean, he is a merchant. He is a merchant of war at this point in time. Solomon, didn't you read? Didn't you read Deuteronomy? I mean, didn't you write that down? Didn't you memorize that? Didn't you study that? Solomon, what happened? But there's one more. Let's look at this in chapter 11 now. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them because they'll surely turn your hearts after their gods. And they did to Solomon. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Solomon, man, what happened? Solomon, what happened? Verse 7 now. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab. Solomon, you went from building a temple for the God of creation to building a temple for the pagan god Chemosh. Solomon, what has happened? And for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites, he did the same for all his foreign wives. It seems that they would just come to him, Solomon, would you build us this so that we can worship our God? And Solomon would say, sure, you can worship that God. Who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. This is like game over. 700 wives building temples for other idols. Solomon, what has gone wrong? What has gone wrong? Now, this is pretty difficult to read. I mean, if you're passionate about King Solomon and God's goodness throughout this nation, I mean, and you read this, it's just a train wreck, man, a dumpster fire, you know? But this isn't the last that we hear of Solomon. Solomon would later write, looking back on his life, looking back on life in general, to leave a legacy to the generation after him. And he would do so in the book of Ecclesiastes. And at times in that book, Ecclesiastes, which you could go and read, you know, Solomon's work, he would say that the pursuit of wealth and the pursuit of power, it's all like meaningless. It's all like chasing after the wind. Perhaps it would seem, and I think this is the case, that Solomon got to the end of his life and looked back on it all and with a repentant heart said, I have missed it. And so he writes this document put together as a legacy to the next generation, the generation after him, but by extension, writes with his legacy to us. And look at what he says in Ecclesiastes 12 now. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments. For this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. I do think that this is what Solomon wanted to be known for in the end. This was the legacy that he wanted to leave. Solomon's name would show up again in the genealogy included in Matthew as the lead up to the arrival of Jesus. So, let's return to our question from the beginning of today's conversation. What is it that you want to leave? What is it that you want to pass on to the people that matter the most to you? It's a question that we should think about now. It's never too early to think about that question. It's never too late to focus in on the question again. So as we think about that question, I want to talk to two groups of people for a moment. I want to talk to those who are Jesus followers, and I want to talk to those who know they are definitely not. First, I want to talk to Jesus followers. I want to talk to Christians. I want you to pay very careful attention to your public displays of your faith. I think it is so important that we pay careful attention to how we act in public when it comes to spirituality and community and Christianity. And I want you to pay very careful attention to how that aligns with who you are when you think no one's looking, but the people closest to you actually are. I want you to pay attention to the gap, perhaps, either big or small, between your public performance of spirituality and your private devotion to Jesus. I want you to pay careful attention to that, because I have met so many people who grew up inside of spiritual homes who saw this gap in mom and dad and said, because of that gap, I don't think Jesus is relevant, I don't think he's real, and I want nothing to do with him. The problem was they saw this gap and thought this cannot be. And I don't want to be a person that lives with that gap either. What they got passed on to them, the legacy, was act one way in public and another way in private. I want you to be oh so careful to not pass that on. So what might you want to pass on instead? Here's how I talk about it. Here's how a lot of people talk about it. I think the most important thing we as Jesus followers can pass on to the people around us, and if you have kids that you could pass on to them, is a gospel legacy. A gospel legacy. And a gospel legacy, it includes humility and vulnerability and transparency. And when you hear me talk about passing on a gospel legacy, you might think, where do I begin? Where do I start? It's a bit easier than you might think. Let me give you a next step. It's this. A gospel legacy is often more about what convinced you rather than convincing them. See, your job is to share how you came to the conclusion that you were a sinner. And your job is to share how you came to the conclusion that Jesus was a Savior for sinners. What brought you to that point? What was the evidence in your life that convinced you you were a sinner? And what was the evidence about the life of Jesus that convinced you he was a Savior worth following? What convinced you of that? It's so important that you can begin to explain that, remembering that you don't have to convince them and you can't make them follow Jesus, but you can explain what convinced you and why you follow Jesus. And this is why I am comfortable with Jack knowing that I am the biggest sinner that I know, because that is true. I know me more than I know you or I know anybody else, and I am convinced I'm the biggest sinner I know, and I want Jack to know that. The biggest sinner is not the neighbor that I disagree with. It's not the politician I can't stand. It's not the people on the other side of the aisle, and it's not him when he messes up. It's me. And when he understands that perspective of how I could say that, I'm convinced it might help him humbly look at his own life and maybe come to the same conclusion. And so when you think of gospel legacy, I just think of it in 3 categories: authority, identity, and activity. I want my kids to know why Jesus is the best authority in my life and how their life will be better when they trust him as Lord and as their authority. I want them to know identity. I want them to know that their story is best understood through the story of Jesus. I want them to know that their performance doesn't shape their value and worth, but Jesus and his performance on the cross does. That's the better approach to life. I want them to get that. Then, of course, activity. This is why my kids last Saturday were at the Pregnancy Resource Center organizing diapers. It's why we do stuff like that. I just want those 3 things, authority, identity, activity, to be a part of gospel legacy. I can't convince them, but I can share what convinced me. Would you consider that? If you're a Jesus follower and you're thinking about gospel legacy, I think that's an easy place to start. The second thing that I want to say is to people who have grown up around religion, grown up around the gap between public performance and private devotion, and I just want you to consider embracing this thought. Here it is. Flawed Christians, they validate Christianity. They don't invalidate it. As much as we would want Christians to be like Christ and be perfect, the reason that they aren't is the reason Jesus showed up and the reason we need him. Broken Christians, they authenticate the need for Christ. They don't invalidate all that he is. And this might be your invitation to reconsider him. But certainly remember this, that when Christians let you down, when I let you down, it doesn't mean that Jesus isn't alive and well. We can remember that. In fact, when Christians let you down, it is a reminder of why Jesus showed up in the first place, to enter into darkness and to bring light into the world of dark people. And that might be an invitation to reconsider Jesus today. So ultimately, as we look at David, and when we look at Solomon, and we look at their dysfunction, there's one thing I need us to know. And it's the very thing that Paul, in the first century, wanted a young leader named Timothy to know. And it was this: keep this command without spot or blame until the appearing of our Lord Jesus. He goes on to describe who Jesus is, which God will bring about in his own time. Who's Jesus? He is God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings and Lord of lords. We have a perfect king. We have a perfect king. The one better than King David, it's Jesus. The one better than Solomon, it's Jesus. The one better than ourselves when we think we are the best authority and rulers of our lives, and that is Jesus. And when you read the Bible and it highlights an imperfect king, remember that Jesus is better and he's king. And when you read the news and you hear about another leader, another authority who is morally broken and flawed, remember there's a better leader, and it's Jesus. And when life shows you again by how you've lived that you are not the best authority, ruler, and leader and king of your own life, remember there is one, and that is Jesus. We are an unfit authority for our lives, but Jesus is not. So remember this: Jesus is the King of kings. So this brings us to the end of our 4-week series, looking at one royal family to see how God would still be faithful to the world through this family, and he was. And this is good news to each of us because the King has arrived, and that is why we celebrate Christmas. Would you pray with me? God, I'm grateful for a king better than the kings we see in the Old Testament, a king better than the kings we see throughout history, a ruler, leader, and authority better than the ones we see now, one better than us. We're grateful for Jesus, a perfect ruler, a perfect king, the king who laid his life down for us to redeem us. And Jesus, I pray for people listening who are serious about leaving a legacy, of leaving an influence that would last beyond them. And I pray, God, that you would give moms and dads and brothers and sisters, all people, the ability to leave a gospel legacy that highlights the fact that authority and identity and activity can absolutely be found in you, and that leads to a life of devotion and delight. God, I pray that you would help us reconsider Jesus. If we've been turned off to him because of the gap we've seen between public performances of faith and a lack thereof privately. And Jesus, I pray that ultimately this time of year we would investigate the claim that Paul made to Timothy and that people make today, that you're the King of Kings, to see what that means and why you're a king worth bowing down before. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Eric, for that hopeful and helpful message, the wrap up of our series right before Christmas. And thank you for trusting us with your time here today. Before I let you go, give me 30 seconds to review two important things with you. First off, I just want to remind you that Christmas Eve it's coming up on Saturday. You probably already knew that, but I want to remind you that we are not doing Christmas Eve for SMCC Online. What we would love for you and your family and your friends is to come to one of our locations and join us. We have very special experience and service for you that we've got planned. And what you can do is visit smccutah.org/Christmas to find the times and locations that work best for you. And also, just a reminder, if you come to one of our locations, we will not be doing Christmas Day services. We want to love and support our staff and volunteers that help on Sunday mornings, and we're going to let them be at home with their families. And what we're going to do instead is we will actually have an SMCC Online message for you with Pastor Trevor on Christmas Day. So it's kind of two important things to remember. One, we're not doing Christmas Eve for SMCC Online. And then also we're gonna have a special Christmas Day service, a short little service with a message for SMCC Online on Christmas Day, but we will not be meeting at our locations on December 25th. So I hope to see you and your family and your friends maybe at one of our locations for Christmas Eve this upcoming weekend. And I'm just really excited for your Christmas that is coming in just a week from now. So I hope to see you either online Christmas Day or at one of our locations at Christmas Eve. Take care.